1 minute, guys.
One minute.
Oh, really?
Kevin, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we can't hear you. You're
All right, shall we start again?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our event. This is the third in a series of presentations on healthy aging brought to you by Emory Global 60 Plus Network. I'm Kevin Kell, Oxford College 75, Emory College 77, and I'm staff liaison to this network. Did you notice that I said global? Today's presentation is a watershed moment for this network. It's the first event that we have shared out to all of Emory's alumni over 60 years of age worldwide. 60 Plus Network began 2 years ago, just as the pandemic was taking hold. Its incredibly enthusiastic board members saw their mission, and they prepared and produced 14 digital events that sustained many Atlanta alumni during those dark months of quarantine. The network was so well received that we decided to broaden the audience to include all of us seasoned alumni. For those of you who have been with us from the beginning, we're grateful for your support and your guidance. For those of you who are new, welcome. Going forward, you can expect to get frequent notifications about our digital events, educational, cultural, intellectual, just fun. As circumstances and COVID protocols allow, you will also receive invitations to local in-person events. So we ask your help in building out this important network of mature alumni. Let us hear from you, and please take time to respond to the occasional survey that we'll send. It will help us help Emory give back to you. At the end of the program, we'll have a Q&A. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and Dr. Sperling will be taking questions at the end. Now I want to introduce board member Andrea Casson, who in turn will introduce today's speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. That's a great introduction to our beloved 60 Plus network. And we say 60 is just a number, and it's the plus that we really focus on. And I think you're going to see some of that today. I am honored to introduce Dr. Laurence Sperling. We were undergrads together. I was a little sister in his fraternity, and I can tell you that back then he was the nice guy, and he had a big heart back then. And you're going to hear a lot about what a big heart he has now. I'm going to give a brief, just some of, we obviously would take the whole hour to go over his whole bio, but in addition to being a double alum of Emory, he is the founder and director of preventive cardiology department. And that just shows you how important heart health is to him. You're going to hear more from him throughout the program, but I want you to know this topic is very near and dear to his heart. I'm sorry, I just had to do that pun. He's co-director of the Cardiovascular Disease Fellowship Program. He is a professor of cardiology at the School of Medicine and he's involved in lots of other programs, clinical trials, many, many things, dedicating his whole life to making us healthier. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sperling.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction. And of course, wonderful to meet with Emory alumni across the country and now globally. And I've learned to say in our virtual worlds, I've learned to say good day because I will frequently flex from meetings from Atlanta to Los Angeles to Korea to Australia. So good day to all. And I'm going to share my screen so we can at least get my presentation up. Hopefully everybody can see it. And as mentioned, I am a preventive cardiologist, and I'll be speaking today about cardiovascular health, something that truly is near and dear to my heart. And I'll also be addressing a really important subject, living longer and better. Let's see if we can go next. There we go. All right. I have no conflicts related to my presentation today. Importantly, my comments today reflect my specific comments and not those of the organizations I work for, work with, or serve. Just a disclosure, this is my wonderful family here in the photo. And as I was mentioning prior to this webinar, my family is truly an Emory family through and through. Our son, Matthew, on the left there, Daniel next to him, my wife, Dr. Sydney Barr, all who have Emory Connections. Both of our sons are graduates of Emory College. I met my wife now of 30 years in the Emory University School of Medicine library, and she is a physician as well, working in the Emory system. So just a little bit of background related to me as we discuss cardiovascular health and living longer and better. I have a unique perspective on health because my background includes molecular and vascular biology, so molecules and genes, but my career has progressed into global health and population health. My Emory connections are deep, and if you look at these two photos here on the left, you can see me as an Emory College undergraduate, where I served as a bodyguard for Dudley. And then the photo on the right, if you concentrate on number 23 on the Emory Eagles, I played on the first Emory University basketball team. And so before there was Michael Jordan and LeBron wearing number 23, there was me, the point guard of the Emory Eagles. And very, very proud of how the team is doing. We stay very connected to the basketball team, and Coach Zimmerman is really tremendous. And then the last connection to Emory is we have a rescue dog, a golden doodle. And this rescue dog here with our son, Daniel. Daniel graduated virtually from Emory College in the middle of the pandemic, as I know many of you have celebrated virtual all kinds of life events during the last couple of years. But next to Daniel is our dog, who is named Dudley. And Dudley literally came to us as a rescue dog with the name of Dudley. And we said, it's perfect. So he's joined our Emory family as well. So today we're going to talk about living longer and better. And so a really important thing for all of you to recognize is that life expectancy has doubled for human beings over the last 100 years. And so we're very fortunate to be living in our present times. And life expectancy has doubled due to improvements on both ends of the age spectrum, a reduction in infant mortality, but also, thankfully, many people living longer and hopefully living better. Now, for those of you, and it sounds like all of you are in the 60 plus age group, good news is that centenarians, those age 100 or greater, are the fastest growing age group worldwide. This is a clip from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution 10 years ago. And this clip informed us through the CDC that US life expectancy surpassed age 78. And so today we should all be thinking about our goals. Should it be living longer, the lifespan? Should it be living better health? But optimally, it should be both, which we'll call the health span. So how do we define optimal health? And specifically, how do we define optimal cardiovascular health? First, let's dial back to the dedication of the National Institutes of Health by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And by the way, it's not the National Institutes of Disease, it is the National Institutes of Health. And he said we cannot be a strong nation unless we are a healthy nation. This is a figure from a paper we published now about 6 or 7 years ago in one of our major heart journals. And in this figure, we describe what is called the population health disease continuum. And as cardiologists or as physicians, we often are encountering disease frequently at later stages. And we pointed out in this paper that we really want to better understand not just how to diagnose disease and treat disease, but we really want to understand health. If we understand health, it'll enable us to better focus on the goals of health promotion and disease prevention. In the same paper, we discussed the importance of health across the lifespan. And one of the points I'll make today is health across the lifespan is not an individual effort. This is very much a team sport, just like basketball. And that team sport involves our family, our community, but it also involves various sectors of health. And in this figure here, you can see that in order to move from health in childhood to adulthood to older age, it really takes a village. How do we define cardiovascular health? And this is from the American Heart Association 2020 impact goal, which was to improve cardiovascular health by Americans by 20% by reducing deaths from cardiovascular disease and stroke by 20%. And a colleague of mine at Northwestern, Donald Lloyd-Jones and others, described a term called Life's Simple Seven. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, not a lot of homework, but at the end of my presentation, I want each of you to sort through your own Life's Simple Seven score, which is quite easy to do. So there's 7 health metrics which define cardiovascular health. These are behavioral metrics like not smoking, ideal body weight or body mass index, regular moderate physical activity, a healthy dietary score, and then heart risk factors to have optimal levels of cholesterol, blood pressure, and blood glucose. This is a paper published by Dr. Donald Lloyd-Jones, and it describes what we call lifetime heart risk. And this is calculated for people in and around the age of 50. And what I want you to pay attention to is if you have heart risk factors at age 50, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4, your lifetime risk of having a heart or blood vessel problem is quite high, anywhere from 30 to 50 to 60%, because heart disease remains the #1 cause of death in our nation. But if you're this light blue curve here, whether you're a man or a woman with optimal cardiovascular risk factors, you will likely live to age 90 and beyond without heart disease. Unfortunately, this is data from colleagues of mine at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, a behavioral risk factor and surveillance score of over 350,000 Americans. Only about 3% of Americans, adults, have ideal cardiovascular health, and about 10% of Americans have poor cardiovascular health, where we see large disparities by age, gender, education, and ethnicity. As we talk about living longer and better today, I want you to appreciate that determinants of health are very intricate. And so our determinants of health are about 20% genetically determined, but only about 20% of the determinants of health and disease are through healthcare and healthcare delivery. So one of your take-home messages today is that living longer and better is in great part determined by social, environmental, and behavioral factors. So this is the first in the series of these webinars for the Emory Alumni 60 plus that we've gone global. And so it's important as well to recognize that health is both local and global. This is from a paper we published several years ago in another major heart journal called Circulation, where we describe the importance of the social determinants of health on heart disease and cardiovascular risk. And we know there are what we call traditional cardiac risk factors: high blood pressure, cholesterol problems, diabetes, smoking, obesity, poor diet, inactivity. But social determinants of health, access to care and healthy foods, psychosocial, behavioral, and environmental factors are major determinants of health and risk for disease. And the way we need to address these are very different from traditional healthcare delivery. I've shown this slide all over the world. I've been invited to give presentations on every continent except for Antarctica, and to emphasize the point that health is local. Although we can determine our genetic code today in 2022, our zip code, where we live, is a more potent predictor of health and risk for disease than our genetic code. And so health varies at a very local level. To demonstrate this, here's Atlanta, Georgia, the city in which I live and where Emory University lives. And if we look at the life expectancy in Buckhead, north of the city, versus Bankhead, southwest of the city, a very short geographic distance. But across this very short geographic distance in Atlanta, Georgia, is a 13-year difference in life expectancy. So I want to share with you a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King at the Convention of the Medical Committee for Human Rights in Chicago from 1966. And Dr. King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and inhumane. This is some research done by our team at the Emory Clinical Cardiovascular Research Institute. The lead author, a former fellow of ours, Haval Kelly, Dr. Haval Kelly. And in this study, we looked at food deserts, areas of food insecurity. And so this is another map of Atlanta. And the green areas that are highlighted in this map are not areas of parks and recreation. These green areas scattered across our city are food deserts, areas of food insecurity, which occur and affect about 1 out of every 10 Americans. And in this paper, we demonstrated that living in a food desert or area of food insecurity was a predictor of abnormalities in cardiovascular health at the level of vascular biology and markers of cardiovascular risk. I'm a professor in the School of Medicine as well as in our School of Public Health, and I do global health. And so I've had the opportunity to learn from many different societies and cultures across the world. This photo here is of a very small country called Slovenia. And the photo here is one of my very good friends, Dr. Zlatko Frost. And Zlatko was a visiting professor at Emory right before the pandemic, living with us here in our home in Druid Hills in Atlanta. Slovenia is a small country, but it really demonstrates the importance of health is local and health is global. This country has a population of 2 million, but for 2 decades, they've had an active nationwide prevention program supported by their Minister of Health. And Slovenia is one of the few countries in the world today that cardiovascular disease is not the #1 cause of death. In this small country, though, there's a west to east gradient of heart risk. And that west to east gradient is significantly determined by where people live, their lifestyles, their behavior, and those social determinants of health. So is there a recipe for optimal cardiovascular health? This is a photo of Dr. Willis Hurst, who was one of my mentors, and Dr. Hurst was one of the most well-known and respected cardiologists in the world. In his notes from a chairman, Dr. Hurst said, "Good nutrition is essential. The problem is we still don't know what to eat." Now, this is a quote from 1987. I do a lot of work on diets and cardiovascular disease, and today I do think we know what to eat. I did a sabbatical a number of years back in the UK and London, working with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the UK and the Imperial College. And one day I was wandering around the National Gallery in London, and I came across this portrait by Peter Paul Rubens of a famous doctor from Antwerp, Ludovicus Nonius. And probably none of you have heard of him, but he was one of the first to recognize the importance of a healthy diet and wrote a famous book at the time called the Dieteticon that was published in 1627. Now, if you do the math, this physician who focused on diet in the 1600s lived to age 93. One of the problems with diets, just as we talk about, I'm on a diet this week, I can't eat that, is semantic confusion. The Greek derivation of the word diet is dieta, and this means a way of life. It doesn't mean torture, but it means embracing how we eat, why we eat. And I frequently say, think about embracing a new way of living that you can do until you're age 100. Now, for fad diets, 95% of people who lose weight with the fad diets will gain that weight back. And the more restrictive or complex a dietary approach is, the more likely somebody will fail. This is a figure from a paper we published a couple of years ago now, looking at well-established heart-healthy dietary patterns. And these healthy dietary patterns, whether a Mediterranean dietary pattern, a DASH dietary approaches to stop hypertension, or a whole food plant-based diet, they share a lot of commonalities. Lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, whole grains. And a healthy dietary pattern, as we think about living longer and better, can reduce cardiovascular risk by as much as 28%. Well, over a decade ago, the FDA moved from the food pyramid to MyPlate. And the MyPlate construct, I think, is a really good one. There's 7 key messages through the MyPlate messaging. One is enjoy food, but eat less. The second is avoid oversized portions. Third is half of this plate should be fruits and vegetables. And it's important to think about the size plate that we eat on, going back to these portion control. Water over sugary drinks, fat-free or low-fat milk in preference. Compare sodium in our foods, and half of our grains should be whole grains. One of the emerging areas of science is the gut microbiome. And so on our body, symbiotically live many bacteria. And so not only do we want to think about eating well for us, about living longer and better, but we want to make sure that the bacteria that live on us and in us are eating well also, because this gut microbiome is an intermediary between us and our diet. And they're metabolites from these bacteria that impact our health and risk for disease. As an example, TMAO, which is synthesized from choline and carnitine, these are very unfavorable metabolites that come mostly from nutrients that are abundant in food of animal origin. As we talk about living longer and better, I know there's a lot of interest now in the concept of caloric restriction and longevity. There's several animal models that have explored this. A rodent model that demonstrated that a 30 to 60% reduction in calories early in life increased the maximal lifespan by 30 to 60%. There have been some models looking at rhesus monkeys one through the National Institutes of Aging, and another one through the University of Wisconsin. And here again, raising the question about whether by eating less during the course of one's life, we can extend survival. There is data ongoing in humans with adequate nutrient intake. There are signals that eating less can have beneficial metabolic, hormonal, and functional changes. This is a figure from a paper we published a couple of years ago that distinguishes between alternate day fasting and time-restricted eating or feeding. Alternate day fasting is truly that, with a certain sequence. On the days you fast, you're taking in only clear liquids. But time-restricted eating or feeding, which many have adopted, is finding a window each day. And during that window period, that's your period of eating, for instance, noon to 6 p.m. These approaches do appear to have potential metabolic benefits, are associated with weight loss and improved cardiovascular risk factors. Of course, individuals taking various medications, or just in general, before you approach time-restricted eating or feeding or alternate day fasting, you should discuss this with your medical care team. But we definitely need more evidence today to better understand the optimal regimens, the impact on what are called circadian rhythms of our bodies and outcomes. I like this quote, an ancient Chinese proverb that says, "Eat less at dinner and you will live to 90." So here's some good news. Chocolate, a little bit of dark chocolate appears to have cardiovascular benefit. In fact, the cacao beans were used as currency for the Aztecs, and the benefit from dark chocolate appears to be related to a flavanol called epicatechin. This flavanol improves the health of our blood vessels, the health of our cells, and the powerhouse of our cells, the mitochondria. It has a favorable effect on our heart risk factors like blood pressure, cholesterol, reducing inflammation, and lowering the risk of heart disease and stroke. So we talked a little bit about healthy dietary patterns as we think about living longer and better. I refer to exercise as the magical ingredient. Exercise is an important part of prevention and lifestyle therapy. The 3 tiers of prevention: primordial prevention is what we should be doing at a societal level, starting at the moment of birth or before birth. Primary prevention is addressing people who already have heart risk factors to prevent them from going on to have overt cardiovascular disease. And secondary prevention, this is people living with heart disease, and people living with heart disease today can also live longer and better. So this is, if we could put exercise in a pill or capsule, it would truly be super, in that there would be nothing we could put in a pill more powerful than regular moderate physical activity. In fact, this is a study that is often quoted about the impact of physical activity or physical inactivity on mortality in men and women that are about the age of those joining the webinar today. And so you can see fitness level, low to high, correlates with a reduction in the risk of death over a decade. A really simple tool is a pedometer. And for those of you that have cell phones or iPhones, there's a tracking device. I know there are many other gadgets that people wear to track themselves, but a simple tool is measuring how many steps you take every day. And I do this myself every day. Less than 5,000 steps a day cumulative, you're sedentary. But over 10,000 steps a day, the equivalent of walking 5 miles, this defines being active. And that's my goal every day, is a minimum of 10,000 steps a day. We published this editorial a number of years ago. And in this editorial, we quoted Dr. Paul Dudley White, who is credited with being one of the fathers of cardiovascular disease prevention. And as well, Dr. White was the mentor of Dr. J. Willis Hurst, who taught me very much as well. And Dr. White here was quoted as saying, "A vigorous 5-mile walk will do more good than all the medicine in the world." There's an initiative called Exercise is Medicine through the American College of Sports Medicine. and the American Medical Association that we should recognize physical activity as a vital sign. Well, the flip side of physical activity is physical inactivity, how much we sit. And our populations have become more sedentary than ever before. Here we are joining together on this Zoom webinar. Hopefully some of you are standing and moving, but I'm sitting. I'm looking forward to my run after the webinar. But the more we sit, the less healthy we become over time. And so if we do the math, our National Physical Activity Guidelines recommend at least 30 minutes of moderate physical activity 5 times a week. So do the math. I was not a math major at Emory, by the way, but that's 150 minutes a week. Now there are 10,080 minutes a week. So even when you're not, quote, exercising, you want to be moving more and sitting less. This is a recent paper from colleagues at the CDC's Division for Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity. And in this paper from our National Health and Nutritional Survey, it's pointed out that modest increases in physical activity can have significant gains. So here in adults in the US, ages 40 to 85, just by moving 10 minutes more per day, we can prevent over 110,000 deaths per year in our nation. So I talked about some of the keys to a better, longer life, healthy dietary pattern, regular, moderate physical activity. Are these keys effective? This is a paper published in the Journal of the American Medical Association back in 2004. It looked at 2,300 elderly Europeans and followed these elderly Europeans for a decade. 4 behaviors predicted a 65% reduction in all-cause mortality, adhering to a Mediterranean dietary pattern, modest alcohol intake, moderate regular physical activity, and non-smoking. I grew up in New York, and New York City has led the charge in many ways in geographic public health initiatives over the past few decades. New York banned smoking in bars and restaurants, the first city, banned trans fats, the first city to require calorie counts on menus, banning smoking in outdoor areas. And these public health initiatives translated to people living in New York City longer and better. If you've heard of the concept blue zones, and even if you haven't, blue zones, it's a study of who are the individuals and populations on our planet that have the greatest likelihood to living to age 100 or above, these centenarians. And per capita, the greatest number of centenarians live in Okinawa, Japan. When we look at blue zones, there are 5 factors that predict these blue zones: diets rich in grains, fish, and vegetables, a low stress environment, high physical activity, a supportive community, and spirituality. Now, to live to age 100, often you need to get a head start with some good genetics as well. And there are genetic determinants of a greater likelihood of living to age 100. For those of you that have set your sights on becoming a super centenarian, these are people that live to age 110 or greater. A really important question is, how can we better understand health? What is some of the science that we're looking into related to living longer and better? There's a national initiative. It's a research program called All of Us. And All of Us is a program through the National Institutes of Health, recruiting 1 million American participants, reflecting the broad diversity across the US. And this is a study trying to better understand health, not just disease. Importantly, here at Emory, we're one of the 3 sites in the southeastern part of the United States that are actively involved in the All of Us research program. Over a decade ago, I was involved in helping to launch Emory's Predictive Health Institute. And we established the Center for Health Discovery and Wellbeing, again, to better understand health, not just disease. And through this initiative, we recruited almost 1,000 Emory employees that we have followed for over a decade now to better understand the determinants of health: physical, mental, emotional, biological. At our Center for Cardiovascular Research, our Cardiovascular Research Institute, there are more and more measurements of health and determinants of health. Just to give you an idea of some of the things we are studying beyond the conventional cardiovascular risk factors: measures of oxidative stress, inflammation, measures of regenerative capacity of our cells. We can measure our genes. We can measure metabolomics, proteomics, and microRNA. And so we are leading our nation and in many ways the world in a better understanding of cardiovascular health versus cardiovascular disease. So we should be striving to live longer and better. But as we begin to move towards a close with some good time for discussion, questions, etc., I do want to leave you all with a reality check. A reality check is, here we are in the United States, a high-income country. We have significant knowledge of science. We have a better understanding more than ever of how to live longer and better, but the predictions are quite concerning. This is from a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine a few years ago, and the predictions are by 2030 that almost 50% of Americans by definition will be obese, and 1 out of every 4 Americans will be morbidly obese. And so the take-home message of this paper is, given the difficulty of achieving meaningful weight loss, these findings highlight the importance of prevention. I'm a preventive cardiologist, and we in our country celebrated almost a 50% reduction in deaths from cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular stroke-related illness and disease, and coronary artery disease from the year 1950 to about 210. So we celebrated significant progress. Despite that significant progress, however, since the year 2010, there's been a stall. Cardiovascular disease has been the leading cause of death in our country since 1910, with the exception of 2 years. These were the 2 years of the Spanish influenza pandemic. We have seen racial and ethnic disparities persist in cardiovascular disease mortality since the 1960s. And since 2010, these curves that had been very celebrated in a decline of heart disease have flattened out, and now for the first time are heading in the wrong direction, especially in younger adults. Over the past several decades, globally, cardiovascular disease has snuck up on us as the #1 cause of death in the entire world. And now, as you all well know, we live in a very interconnected world and an interconnected global economy. We've talked today about diets, we've talked about physical activity, we've talked about traditional cardiovascular risk factors and social determinants of health. A really important understanding is that our environments, from our internal environment of our microbiome to our immediate external environment, to the air that we breathe, to the toxic metals in our environment, the chemicals that are impacting our environment, and importantly, climate change greatly affect our health and risk for disease and our likelihood of longevity. Over 9 million deaths worldwide in 2019 were related to environmental impacts, with over 60% of these related to cardiovascular disease. Well, even in the midst of a global pandemic, we have seen, this is data from the CDC in 2020, that heart disease remained the #1 cause of death in our nation. COVID deaths in 2020 were number 3. And the age-adjusted death rate in 2020 increased in our country by 16%, with overall death rates highest in non-Hispanic Black people and non-Hispanic American Indian and Alaska Native people. As we consider this reality check here, over the last several years, we should be opening our eyes that we have seen converging syndemics of a population with a chronic burden of chronic diseases impacted by health disparities and now challenged by an infectious disease and the consequences of this infectious disease. It wasn't provided in my initial bio, but since October of 2019, I remain an Emory faculty member, but I have the great honor and privilege of serving as the executive director of the CDC CMS National Million Hearts Initiative. This is an initiative that was started a decade ago with the very explicit goal of realizing the potential for preventing at least 1 million heart attacks, strokes, and cardiovascular events in our nation. We recently launched the next 5 years of the initiative, Million Hearts 2027. And our priorities are building healthy communities, optimizing care, and focusing on health equity. So it truly has been an honor to spend some time with all of you here today talking about cardiovascular health, talking about the possibilities of living longer and better. I mentioned that we do have the knowledge, the tools, and the capabilities for living longer and better. But as we move towards our discussion and our question and answer period, I'd like to highlight 4 final points. First is that the components of cardiovascular health are well defined. The second is that cardiovascular health is possible. We can live longer and better, extending the health span. But I hope you've taken away today that our health is not individual. Our health is interdependent. It's interdependent upon those with whom we live, our families, our communities, but health is both local and it's global. We are very much interconnected, and we all need to be good stewards of living longer and better for all. With that, thank you for your time and attention. It is truly a joy to be speaking with Emory alumni, and Emory is very dear to my heart. Thank you again. Glad to take questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sperling. That was fascinating, very captivating. I took a lot of notes, but I'm going to have to go back and watch it again. Even though you went at a nice slow pace, I want to watch it again to make sure I catch everything. You gave us a lot of tips of what we need to do. I felt like you had some themes, and clearly eating less and getting exercise. And in your mind, for our group, and maybe considering we may have folks in our group who aren't so mobile, what do you think is the 1 or 2 things we can do, or the biggest mistake that we're making to prevent cardiovascular health?
Sure. So at an individual level, it's trying to think about making healthier choices. Remember that the Greek derivation of diet is dieta, which is a way of life. So we all want to think about how we move our health to a little bit of a better place. And so for each and every one of you, although I can give you advice, you should make some decisions today about at least one area where you want to think about some healthy steps in the right direction, because these healthy steps can lead to living longer and better. And so I firmly believe at every stage of the life course, you can help determine your health. But beyond that, it's making the healthy choice the easy choice, because many people who live among us, don't always have the access to healthy walkable environments or healthy food environments or healthy air that they breathe. And so I do think we as a community and as a society need to really work hard to create opportunities for better health for all. And those opportunities for better health should really begin at an early stage and allow people better health across the lifespan for a focus on a better health span.
Thank you. I just want to remind our group, if you have a question, please do put it in the chat and I will certainly ask Dr. Sperling. Can you tell us a little bit more about the fasting and the time restriction eating, or where we might get more information about that?
Yeah, and certainly, and just to let our attendees know here that Andrea is looking over the chat. I see a couple of hands that are raised. If you can maybe add your questions and comments to the chat, because that's being monitored and those questions are being handed back to me here. I'll leave it up to all of you if you want to open up to some of our attendees an opportunity to ask a question. I'll leave that up to you. But as far as time restricted eating or feeding or intermittent fasting, this has become a popular area of focus for many. Although going back for eons, many cultures have embraced this, at least related to various religious celebrations, for instance. But when we think about, well, let's just talk about time restricted eating or feeding. What we do know scientifically is that this is a pretty feasible strategy for many people. And it's a strategy many people can learn to live with, not just for a week or a month, but for years and years and years. And the science is quite interesting. It's favorable. But in my last bullet there, I said we need to learn more about this in terms of health promotion, disease prevention. We do have rodent models and rhesus monkey models, but we want to parallel the data in humans. But clearly, better food choices, and in our US environment, we talk about portion distortion. If you travel to other countries, you'll notice very quickly that the portion sizes are much smaller, and often the quality of food is a lot better. And so a couple of themes, eat less, but also try to limit processed foods. Many people in our country and now globally, a significant portion of their diet is processed. And so the more you can move your diet towards its original sources, the more likely you will have a healthy dietary pattern.
Thank you. And that leads into our next question. We're now getting flooded with questions in the chat, so we're not going to be able to get to them all, but we'll do our best. So many, when we reach our golden years, we are eating less and sometimes not getting in enough caloric intake. So do you see that as folks get older, that they're not getting the proper nutrition, and how might we address that?
So great question. So as we get older, our body's physiology changes from our head to our toes. And for many, as they age, their caloric requirements do drop. Part of your goals as you get older is to, reduce the decline in muscle mass. And so I talked some about the importance of moving more and sitting less. In addition to that, though, you do want to focus on maintaining your core for balance. You also want to maintain your muscle mass. And that's critically important. And those two together are predictors of better health as one ages. Now, as far as, are you becoming malnourished as you become older because you're eating less? And the answer is not necessarily. But even if you're eating less, you do want to focus on a healthy composition of your diet. And you want to maintain a balanced diet. One of the downsides or potential downsides of a complete vegan diet is we need essential amino acids. And so essential means that if our body doesn't make them, if we don't get them through our diet, we can become depleted. And so you want to really think about balancing your diet with essential amino acids, nutrients, minerals, and you cannot get these through a handful of supplements.
And that leads in, I think you're teeing up all the questions. We have two questions on cholesterol and the relationship to cardiovascular health. We all saw in the 70s, eggs became the worst food in the world, and then they weren't. So can you talk to us a little bit about cholesterol and that impact on our CV health?
Yes, certainly. So I served as a member of the writing committee for our nation's 2018 cholesterol guidelines. At Emory, we have established a national center of referral for individuals with genetic cholesterol problems. And we have developed some very unique approaches to treating people with very, very high cholesterol levels. But for the general public, we do know that there's a linear relationship between cholesterol in a population and risk for vascular disease. It's not as simple as just the total cholesterol, but the elements of the cholesterol profile. There's the good cholesterol, and I just gave a lecture to our first year medical students about this, and I tell them, teach your patients that the HDL, that's the healthy cholesterol you want higher, and the LDL is the lousy cholesterol that you want lower. Now, we know that it's not just cholesterol in our diet that drives the risk for heart disease. It is processed food, saturated fats, trans fats, and it's leading to chronic inflammation. That's the substrate or nidus for cardiovascular disease. Now, I'll make one comment about eggs. I saw patients in the clinic yesterday, and this came up in clinic yesterday. Eggs are a very unique food. The white of an egg is albumin, that's pure protein. The yellow of an egg is yolk, and that is pure cholesterol. And so in general, for a healthy dietary pattern, you want to be focused on the three themes I talk about are Mediterranean, flexitarian, that's less animal protein, and cholesterol lowering. There are things you can do in your diet to lower your cholesterol: oat bran, nuts, seeds, walnuts, almonds. My recommendation would be to not eat too many eggs, but if you enjoy eggs, prefer an egg white over the whole of the egg.
Great, thank you. And we're nearing the end of our time, and you mentioned some homework, and I saw the list of the stats that you gave, and I know my primary care physicians at Emory, and they always, after my physical, send me those stats and about 30 other ones. And that is helpful. And now I need to go back and find it and pay attention. Can you tell us more about the homework, and also what should our members do to track their cardiovascular health? Do we need to go to a cardiologist, or can our PCP help us, give us a baseline or start us on the right path?
Yeah, really important and great question. And by the way, I'm going to give you a little homework, but no essay questions and no grades. This is pass fail. So the homework is for each of you to look up your Life Simple 7 score. For each of you as well, if you're age 60 or above, we know that cardiovascular risk increases with age. It doesn't mean that age itself is an ultimate determinant of cardiac risk, but age is really a way to conceptualize exposure to heart risk factors over time. It's an integral in calculus. So at age 60 or above, I would ask all of you to better understand your cardiovascular risk, not only your cardiovascular health. Absolutely discuss this with your physician and care team. I do not think everybody needs to see a cardiologist or a preventive cardiologist. Through a trusted and partnered relationship with your primary care physician, be proactive. Come to your next visit asking your physician or care team that you have some questions. You'd like to better understand your risk for heart disease and steps you can take to prevent it. Extend that conversation to your family, because these are conversations we often don't have but better understand your risk, better understand your family's risk, I'm sorry. And then I talked about this earlier, but for each and every one of you, make a plan that you, from today on for the rest of your life, that hopefully you'd like to live longer and better. And make a plan to say, what's at least one or a couple of steps where I think I can hopefully live longer and better, because you need to own that and embrace that. And there we call that a concept of self-efficacy. When we look at people that make successful and meaningful changes for the rest of their life, and I have seen patients lose 100 pounds and keep it off for the rest of their life, or go from being that person who's a couch potato to a regular exerciser and make a change for the rest of their life. But it's usually that person has made that decision and owned it and lived it.
That's excellent advice. And I'm hoping all of our members and everyone that views this later will, each of us identify one thing we can do to help us live longer. I think what's going to be our final question, Dr. Sperling, and you, once again, you led right into it, is let's say we go to our physician and we find out we are at risk. Can it be reversed?
Yeah, so heart disease is a large category. I mean, there are many parts of the heart that can be affected by disease states. Many of the problems that affect the heart can be significantly changed for the better. I frequently get asked about diseases of the arteries, and I say that we can absolutely shut off this disease process. We can prevent people, even with heart disease, from having further heart problems for the rest of their life. Now, we can't in 2022, we often can't dial back to a biology equivalent to the day you were born, but remember our goal, it's living longer and better. And so I truly see miracles every day. I see people who a few decades ago would have been destined to die of heart disease at a pretty early stage in life. And I see these people now age 90. And I do have some patients who are age 100 and above. And when I see these individuals living longer and better, it is truly a celebration. And for me, it's truly a miracle.
That's fantastic. That's very inspiring for all of us. And hopefully it will, I think you've given us a lot to think about and hopefully motivate us. Thank you so much for your time and what you've shared with us. I knew you were the nice guy with a big heart back then, and you've just superseded the expectations. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to wrap us up. I just want to say a quick thanks to everyone for the great questions and for staying with us and joining us today. It was great to see everyone.
Okay, everybody. Well, earlier today, I was rifling through the pantry, and I just happened to notice that these were expiring tomorrow. I had this wicked thought that they ought not go to waste. I have rethought that. Dr. Sperling, thank you so much. On behalf of the 60 Plus Global Network Board of Directors, we thank you so much for this great presentation. We hope that we can call on you again. Just be prepared, because we are. And I want to thank all of you in our audience today, our global Emory alumni. Just remember to keep an eye out for notifications about future events. We and Emory look forward to giving back to you. Thank you so much and good evening.